But out of the ashes from the volcano, a forest grows in the Kayangaroa plains, bringing a wealth of exports to the port of Napier.
It was just a small school, 15 children, and we had just gone in from the play break. Tom, you would be about standard 2 at the time, about 8 years old.
Looking out straight out from the school, approximately a mile to 3/4 of a mile, the dust was just rising off the hills.
And at about 12 minutes to 11, the quake came.
On February the 3rd, 1931, at 10:48 in the morning, an earthquake struck the Hawke's Bay. Measuring 7 3/4 on the Richter scale, it was the first earthquake of a high magnitude to hit a populous area since the European settlement of New Zealand. The epicenter was located just 12.5 miles north of Napier City. The naval sloop HMS Veronica had berthed at Napier just 3 hours before the quake, and within 9 minutes radioed details and requirements to Auckland Naval Base. 2 cruisers left Auckland 3.5 hours later with doctors, nurses and medical supplies. Out of a population of 25,000 in Napier and Hastings, 1 in every 100 was killed and 2 in every 100 were cot cases. Aftershocks scared the populace out of those homes that were still left standing. It seemed the patience of the Old Testament Jehovah had run out at last. "250 people were killed and hundreds were injured. Eventually, half the population were taken south. It was 9 days before a car reached Napier over this road. It was many weeks before the railway north was restored. The Ministry of Works set to work to design a new highway to Taupo. Supported by ground surveys, aerial mapping inspired a new technique in bridge design. When he saw the result, the Minister of Works declared aerial photogrammetry a failure. The Mohaka Bridge had a sag in it. Motorists were accustomed to jolting onto flat truss crossings. Not until they drove over the new Mohaka Bridge were they impressed with the smoothness of the transitions and the steep approaches.
Operating passenger service on the Napier-Taupo Road has always presented major difficulties. Ever since mechanical vehicles use the road, there's been major problems. A mixture of pumice dust and lubricating oil make a first-rate cutting compound.
Trucking operators became so used to trouble on the Napier-Taupo road that they set up roadside depots for spare parts. They could change a gearbox in an hour and a half.
Today we seem to have exchanged one problem for another. The pumice dust problem has practically disappeared. Corrugations and broken step axles are a thing of the past. But in their place we've got these long, steep pools, hot days with following winds, and this is reflected in the heating of the motors. Operating a passenger service, we've got to maintain suitable timetables. We can't crawl up these hills at slow speeds. We've got to get up 25 miles, 30 miles an hour, and this calls for power and strain. The designers have been unable to design a motor to withstand the pressures and the work of these roads and to design suitable cooling systems to counter this. Consequently, we have motor seize-ups through overheating. Climbing the hills is not the only problem. After slogging it up the hill, trying to maintain a timetable, the natural thing is to put on some speed going downhill. Unless the driver watches it very carefully, he'll over-rev his motor, the motor will run faster than the road speed, timing goes haywire, valves and pistons become tangled, and all sorts of mechanical problems. Until the Ministry of Works commenced the reconstruction of the Taupo Road, it was not uncommon for our passenger service vehicles to be actually lost in the snow during the winter months. I've known coaches to leave Napier for Taupo and we wouldn't hear of them again for a couple of days. They'd be bogged in the snow climbing to the Okura, telephone lines would come down with the snow and we wouldn't know what had happened to the passengers or the vehicles. Times are very different now. The snow falls just as heavily as it did before, but because of the equipment that the Ministry of Works has available, they'll send out bulldozers and graders in front of our coaches. They clear the way, and it's years since we failed to make a trip between Napier and Taupo. My company is very proud of that, but we have to acknowledge that it's the Ministry of Works equipment and the men that have always got us through.
The Napier-Taupo Road is part of State Highway 5. At Taupo, it joins State Highway 1 for 5 miles to Wairake, before continuing on to Rotorua. The road has a dual purpose. It must be aesthetically pleasing and safe to drive on. At the same time, it must be strong enough to withstand the passage of heavy traffic. Because State Highway 5 is a national railway, it bears the full brunt of the logging traffic from the central North Island. At present, New Zealand exports many logs to earn overseas funds. If these logs could be processed to pulp before being shipped, we would earn more money overseas for the same quantity of raw material, and we'd provide jobs for more people in New Zealand. With this object in view, a joint New Zealand and Japanese consortium is planning a new pulp mill at Napier. While the project is a worthwhile one for the country, it raises the dilemma of the present course of our development. Another farm is to disappear under the concrete floors of industrial expansion, joining the many thousands of acres being smothered by the sprawl of urban development. Recognizing the growing concern for aesthetics, the company proposes to screen the pulp mill with a row of trees to hide it from the highway. The extra traffic the mill will generate is another spur to the present upgrading of the Napier-Taupo Road. The last of the old Thomas Highway will disappear with the completion of the 5-mile Runanga deviation. Work on the deviation ran into difficulties on the Okoeka face, a steep section of large and fractured boulders closely bedded in soft silt. Too large to be moved whole, the jagged stones must be blasted to pieces and excavated to the depth of the roadway. Beset by dust in summer and freezing mud in winter, the contractors have endured many frustrations in their struggle to force the road through. The biggest breed in crawler tractors in New Zealand has been thrown into the battle. On this 40-ton twin Euclid, the driver sits 8 feet above the ground. One 220 horsepower engine over each track provides the motive power. As the steel ripping teeth strike the submerged boulders, the whole machine shudders to a pause. The irresistible force grapples the immovable object. Hardly seems to be winning its struggle against the face, but gradually the gap to the highway below is being narrowed.
good to see American people taking interest in this sort of thing, Texan. Archaeology is sort of something like, you've heard the story in Rotorua about the tanning fire kept swallowing the people and taking them all away, and how they went away and they opened him up and got all the treasures back. Well, archaeology is something like that, if you think of the land as the tanning fire that swallowed all the history, then the archaeologist can come along and open him up and get all these things back. This sort of work is really getting things for the Maori people. It's getting their history back, the things that they can no longer get from traditions and from written accounts by early missionaries. We can add to all those things by doing this sort of work. And so we go to a site with a great deal of reverence, in fact. We don't just go there to find greenstones, to find treasures, something we can sell. We go there to find things that can be used to tell us more about the people who can no longer talk to us.
It will be preserved for a lifetime.
Yes, it'll be set aside and put away carefully, and in 1,000 years' time we hope that these things can be used by the Maori people as demonstrations of their great ancestry.
Taupo mahi treva. Someday this work you've been doing for my people will be greatly appreciated.
In preserving the heritage of our past, we should ask ourselves, what legacy will we be leaving to the future?
Wilbur, where are we? What is this place? Where are we, Wilbur? Where are we?
Now Blanche. Now Blanche.
Wilbur, what is this place? Where are we, Wilbur? Where are we?
Now Blanche. Now Blanche. Wait a minute. Say, are we on the right road to Napier here?
Are we sure we're on the right road? Today, men like J.A. Gibb no longer speak of the bread without scarceness. Man can play strip poker with the natural resources of this planet. He may dream of stars and engage in casual flirtations with other worlds, but he remains wedded to this earth, his only sustenance. No animal can go on increasing indefinitely, for two cannot exist in the space of one, but that each has half of what he had before. Taupo condemned the pursuit of wealth and warned of disaster. Before it happened, he spoke. They heard him, but his words were not heeded. Colenso preached the wrath of the Old Testament Jehovah. The people had not heeded the words of Jehovah, and his wrath was terrible. He sent fire, famine, flood, and pestilence. Now men speak of the ecology and the harm to nature when rivers and lakes are destroyed and filled with the refuse of 20th century civilization. The fumes of traffic and industrial progress poison the air. The warning is clear to those who have ears to hear it. But will 20th century man heed the warning any more than have those who died before him? Make peace with each other, certainly, but above all make peace with nature, for the sake of those who may follow. For if there is no peace, neither man nor nature may survive.